So I've just lost it, sorry. Just about Badgerys Creek and a few other issues. But just to start off first, the joint study into aviation needs in the Sydney region, I noticed that it recommended on page 4 that if Badgerys Creek was given the go-ahead, work should begin immediately, and this is a quote, work should begin immediately to update the environmental impact study. Where's that up to, like considering it's 1985 since we had the last one?
No, the last environmental impact study of the Badgerys Creek site was done in 1999, 2000.
What, a full EIS?
Yeah, full EIS.
On a Badgerys Creek?
Yes.
Oh, I missed that, thank you.
It was quite an extensive, in fact at the time it was the largest EIS ever undertaken. It was a very comprehensive document. It went through the Commonwealth legislation and at the time it was approved and agreed as a basis for progressing. The government at the time did not proceed with the development. Subsequently now, a decision has been taken to proceed with the development of the Badgerys Creek site as a Western Sydney airport. The work we're now undertaking, and I'm sorry, Senator, we covered a bit of this yesterday with the Western Sydney unit, but the work that's now been undertaken by the department does include undertaking the work which would involve an environmental assessment and meeting the requirements of the Commonwealth environmental legislation for the development of the airport site. So we're currently ascertaining what requirements there would be for environmental assessment of the proposal. We're now developing a detailed proposal for development of the site, undertaking negotiations or starting the discussions with the Sydney Airports Corporation under their first right of refusal, and then that will feed into a review of the environmental issues.
So can you give us some dates on that, when it's going to start, when you expect it to be completed?
We are currently discussing with the Federal Environment Department the requirements for environmental assessment. We are looking at what needs to be done to update the work that was done in 2000 for there hasn't been a great deal of change in the site.
So when you say update the 2000 work, you're referring to the 1999 one?
2000 EIS, that's
right,
correct.
Okay.
So,
but can you give us some dates?
I can't give you a date, but we would hope to be able to be in a position in the next couple of months ascertain what environmental assessment will be required, and also we will also be as part of that starting a community consultation process.
So in the next 2 months you'll decide what form the EA needs to be?
That's correct.
Is that how you'd summarise it?
What issues need to be addressed in any...
And then you mentioned community consultation. When do you expect that to start?
We envisage that later this year we'll start a process of community consultation once we've got developed an indicative airport development proposal and the like, and depending on what the environmental assessment requirements are, that will shape the community consultation process.
And when do you expect the EA to be finished?
I don't have a time frame. That will depend on the requirements of the assessment. Okay,
thank you. And with this EA, will it be looking at if there should be a curfew at Badgerys Creek or if there should not be a curfew?
Well, that'll be a matter for the requirements of the environmental assessment.
So the EA will consider if Badgerys Creek should have a curfew and the impact of curfew?
No, I didn't say that. I said that's yet to be determined as to what the extent of the environmental assessment will be.
Right.
But as given in evidence last night, with your indulgence, Senator Rhiannon, we have protected to a large extent the noise corridors in
That's correct. That's correct. We're very fortunate in the sense that the Badgerys Creek site has been protected essentially since the late 1980s. The noise exposure forecast, the noise contours effectively, the New South Wales State Government has precluded development within those noise contours since the 1980s. So we're very fortunate that we have a site which has got very little development in close proximity to the airport site.
So that sounds like the decision's already been made not to have a curfew.
Well, no decision's been taken, apart from the fact that the airport has always been... excuse me. The development of the site has always been based on it being a 24-hour operation.
Right. Okay, thank you.
You better have them spelled out.
Yeah, do you want to... So.
Just because Senator Conrad walks in, you don't have to choke.
I'm hurt.
Morning, sir.
Just to understand a bit more about the process, and you made reference to this in your earlier question
Conroy, that
answer
being
when I was
clear.
asking about the EA. So the Sydney Airport Corporation has the first option on agreeing to build Badgerys Creek. How long does it have to make up its mind about whether it will take up that option?
There's a process set out in the sale agreement for the airport. The first stage is a consultation period, which has to be a minimum of 5 months but can be up to 12. And after that, the Commonwealth has to provide what's called a notice of intention, which sets out what the Commonwealth's proposal is for the development of the airport at the site, which is effectively the document which would be a contract to build and develop the airport. The Sydney Airports Corporation then has a period under the sale agreement by which they can consider that, which I think, John, is 4 months. I think it's of the order of 4 months or so to make a decision, depending on the contractual timeframes that are being met.
Can you just clarify, like, what actually kicks off the 5 months? When do we start the countdown?
There's a formal process under the sale agreement where the Commonwealth issues what's called a notice to consult, and we envisage issuing that very shortly.
Right.
We've currently been undertaking informal consultations with the company. We envisage issuing the notice of consult shortly, which will formally start the process of under the sale agreement.
And what does shortly mean? Like within the week, within the month?
I would hope it would be within the next month or two.
We're
We're currently engaging specialist advisors to the Commonwealth to assist us in the process. Once that's in place, I envisage being able to issue the notice to consult from then.
So July, August.
That would be my intention.
Thank you. In the May, just going back to some earlier estimates, May 2012 estimates, you replied in response to my question on notice, it was number 54, about the last airport risk assessment on Sydney Airport's third runway. There has been no EIS in relation to Sydney Airport operations since the third runway development in the early 1990s. Can you confirm when the last airport risk assessment was undertaken? Because how you answer the question, why I'm asking it again, is that you didn't answer it about risk assessment specifically, unless all EISs, I must admit, maybe you're saying all EISs have risk assessments in them. So maybe that's what I'll ask my first question. When you answered it by saying there's been no risk assessment in relation to Sydney Airport operations since the third runway development in the early 1990s, did the EIS always have a risk assessment in it?
My recollection is that the EIS that was done for the parallel runway development did include a risk assessment, that's correct. I'm not aware of a risk assessment of that form being done since that time.
So you said your recollection. Do you need to take it on notice, or?
I'll take it on notice. I'm not aware of any risk assessment of the type that was done for the parallel runway EIS being done since that time.
So since Sydney Airport's third runway came in, we have had no risk assessment undertaken. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, if you can clarify me, what a risk assessment are you looking at? Clearly, the operations of the airport are constantly under assessment and review. For instance, we do security assessments, there are safety assessments by the operating agencies and the authorities. If you're looking at a comprehensive risk assessment of a new development, that has not been done since the parallel runway development.
Isn't that surprising?
No, the individual agencies, for instance, Air Services Australia or the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, or in our case, the Office of Transport Security, are working with industry constantly on risk management and also developing new processes for handling traffic and also passengers. But if you're looking at a formal risk assessment in the sense that was done for a development, I'm not aware that that's been done in such a comprehensive way since the parallel runway, and has not needed to be done because the parallel runway fundamentally changed the operations of the airport. Therefore, accordingly, a full risk assessment was done as part of the environmental impact study.
So you're saying that the comprehensive risk assessment isn't needed because, and I'm certainly not trying to verbal you, I'm just trying to understand this. So you're saying that the comprehensive risk assessment isn't needed because the third runway in fact made the airport safer?
It's certainly because the third runway was changing the nature of operations at the airport. The risk assessment was undertaken as part of that because it changed the way in which the airport runways would operate and the traffic flow both on the ground and in the air into and out of the airport. We haven't had that significant change of operations, but having said that, all of the agencies continually update their process and procedures on risk assessments as they handle traffic growth and the like in and out of the airport.
But we're talking about the comprehensive risk assessment, that is over 25 or just on 25 years since that was undertaken. So I take your point, and I'm not trying to doubt that the people working at the airport do everything to make it safe, but having the comprehensive risk assessment would seem as though that needs to be a foundation of how you manage airports.
No, I don't think so, in the sense that if all of the operators, the various operators of the airport do their risk assessment of their operations, the risk assessment that was in the EIS that you're referring to was in relation to changing the infrastructure of the airport and what that then did. What that largely reviewed was the safety of moving to parallel runway operations over and above the former cross-runway operations that took place at the airport. Since that time, we've largely operated parallels with a combination of modes involving the cross and the parallel operations quite safely, very safely. But obviously the operating agencies continually review their safety management systems to make sure they take risk assessment and modify their operations as necessary. So all of the operators at the airport utilise safety management systems, including the Air Services Australia, to make sure they're constantly updating those for any identified changes in risk.
But none of that material is publicly available, though, is it?
All of it is part of the operations of the individual companies and firms involved. I don't think that that's publicly available, no.
No. So whereas the risk assessment, those comprehensive risk assessments that have been a part of EAs in the past have been publicly available.
They have, but the risk assessments, to understand what they are, was largely an analysis of traffic and similar operations globally around what would happen if you move from the pattern of operations that was pre-parallel runway to parallel runway. It was largely a mathematical and numerical risk assessment of what happens when you move to different configurations. Sorry, John.
Senator, I was going to say, I think part of the issue here is that the environment legislation and the need for an environment assessment and risk assessment of environmental impacts are triggered when there's a major new proposal, a major new development, or to operate something in a completely different way. That was why there was the full process carried out when the new runway was developed. But that basically set the pattern then for Sydney Airport operations, which have been followed since. So in the absence of any major new change to the airport layout or its operation since, there's been no need and no trigger under the environment legislation for a further assessment, including the risk assessment.
But over those 25 years, the amount of traffic through Sydney Airport would have just increased astronomically. Do we agree on that?
Well, there's certainly been a significant increase in aircraft movements and passenger movements, yes.
So in terms of a crash risk analysis, isn't that needed?
Not in the way that it was done in the EIS, no, because we're not changing the fundamental parameters of the field. Certainly, as I say, the agencies involved continually update their safety management systems, and as we've seen with Air Services Australia last night, who spoke about some of their measures they've been taking over the last number of years to increase capacity and safety management, they are constantly updating their procedures and processes to take account of the traffic growth.
Okay, thank you. I'll just move on to upgouging. Delightful word. So
Upgauging? Gauging, not gouging.
Upgauging, isn't
gauging.
it? I thought upgauging might have been a bit of honesty coming into what goes on. But anyway, upgauging. Thank you for correcting me. Have the factors that limit upgauging, because you've outlined them before when I've asked questions about this, have they changed? Because my recollection of when I've asked it before, you said that it wouldn't be occurring at Sydney Airport for various reasons. So is that still the case, or can an upgauging occur at Sydney Airport?
Upgauging does and will continue to occur at Sydney Airport. There are some limitations at Sydney Airport that mean that it is not going to continue at the rate that it possibly has in the past because of the limited amount of parking and apron space available and the terminal facilities of Sydney Airport, which makes it more difficult to accommodate a shift into larger aircraft types. The recent master plan, which has been approved for the airport, sets out a range of proposals for new terminal expansion, which tries to provide for an upgauging to enable them to handle passenger growth, given the limitations of the airport's movement rate at 80 movements per hour. So over time, they've made some assumptions about upgauging, but there are physical limitations at Sydney Airport as to the extent to which everyone will move, and also market limitations given the nature of the market as to everyone will move into larger aircraft types. And that's been steadily happening, but with some limitations.
Some guidance from you, Senator Rhiannon?
I've got about 2 questions.
Okay.
And then, this is my last point. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things and then it's back to you, Chair. Thank you. So could you tell the committee what percentage of current aircraft movement at Sydney Airport is undertaken by the small planes?
We can get that data for you.
So,
When you say small, you're talking
yeah, all those,
non-jet aircraft?
yeah, the non-jet aircraft.
We can get that information for you.
So there, unfortunately, I haven't got it in my head, but there was a recent report, and I thought it was 26% of the small planes. So to ask the question, if you can take it on notice, what is the percentage, and any changes that have occurred in that, and what you're anticipating could change with upgauging?
We'll get that information for you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I think, as I understand it, that concludes